In this next hour, we'll be chatting to a number of guests, and I just want to introduce my analysts for this particular hour. As we say, good evening to Makhosini Mgitywa, a former colleague actually, but now a political analyst, is going to be making sense of some of the drama that's played out today. Makhosini, good to have you. Always good to talk to you.
Always, always, and thank you very much for having me.
All right, and the CSIR really has got this amazing model, which we hope is going to work its magic again, and we'll be talking again to Dr. Ndumiso Tringo, but you're going to chat to us a little bit about what's been happening on social media in terms of mentions and so on and so forth, and we'll see if that translates into votes. Sometimes the two are not related, but we'll check in with you in a few moments' time, because what I'd like us to do right now is I'm going to introduce you to our very own, the SABC's Emil Amrau, and he's standing by this magical wall to tell us a little bit about what these results that are coming through so far, what do they mean? And all of this you can get on our SABC news platform. So go on to www.sabc.co.za, click on elections, and you'll be able to see all of this information unfolding in real time. Emil, thanks so much indeed for joining us. Make sense of what we're seeing so far. I can see the graph that you have is showing a pretty dramatic picture, but we must caution our viewers, right, that it's still early days.
We are, thank you, Peter. We are, of course, in early days. I think there's not even a dozen and a dozen and a half voting districts already been counted. So we've still got a long way to go. But as it stands, if we look at the Eastern Cape, the ANC is well in charge so far, with about 783 votes counted. The DA followed by the EFF, the UDM, and some support for the ATM, the African Transformation Movement as well. So let's move on then. Just going to click on to Gauteng. As we can see, we've got no votes coming in from Gauteng as yet. The process is probably still ongoing in Gauteng. Move over to Free State. Very similar trend, of course, with the Freedom Front Plus garnering quite a bit of views, obviously, in the Free State. The ANC still leading, followed by the Freedom Front Plus, the DA, and the EFF taking in fourth place at the moment as we head into the 2nd of November. Onto Limpopo, we see that no votes have come in so far in that province. KZN the same. Northern Cape the same. Northwest the same. Mpumalanga the same. And Western Cape, obviously a lot of voting happening here. We've got the DA fully in charge, the DA which runs most councils in the Western Cape already, followed by the Freedom Front Plus. Interesting that we don't see the ANC or the EFF or Good showing up. Oh, Good right at the bottom there with 11 votes in so far. Not exactly what we would expect, but as we did say, it is early days, and we've still got a long way to go until we see these results changing.
I suppose this is very locational and perhaps outlying areas.
Sure.
Once the bigger areas, the townships and the metros start to come in, the more traditional results will start to show, I guess.
Of course. Obviously, we've got to wait for those metros to come in as well, which will give us a large indication of what we need to be seeing. And also, we'll have to see how the low voter turnout also plays an impact on the results as compared to the previous elections.
All right. Emil, thanks so much indeed. We'll be chatting to you. I hope you've got your energy drinks with you.
Not yet. I need to get them now.
All right, Emil. Thanks very much indeed. Well, let's try and unpack some of this. And Makhosini, let me start with you, just to get a sense of what the numbers tell us. You know, young people, for me, I suppose it's the same kind of thing around the world in terms of participating in politics. We know for a fact that 13 million of them could have registered and didn't. And yet this election is going to be decided by around 10 million people, which means if every young person who could have voted, registered and voted, they could have changed this country to the way they want it to be, given that they're the most disaffected. Why didn't they show up?
Look, I think that's the fault of political parties. If you have a large block of important citizens like young people not bothering to go out and vote, that's an indictment on the political parties that they failed to galvanize and energize that constituency. The EFF, has had some kind of traction with young people, but it's young people who think in a certain way and not all young people. So if you're talking to young militant people, but you're not talking to everybody who is young, then you are going to be successful to a certain extent. But I think this is just an indication of how the majority of the people of South Africa aren't as pleased as everyone would want them to be about the political system that they are having. And also, there is also the factor of the ANC base being very stubborn, very difficult to penetrate. For other parties, ask UDM, ask the IFP, ask PAC, ask COPE. They'll tell you that it's very difficult to get that base. And instead of going to vote for other parties, they'd rather stay at home. So I think it's a multiplicity of factors. Yes, of course, it's early days, because also, as you correctly pointed out, that even the results that we've seen now are just for certain localities, and you can't read much out of that. You've got to have a much bigger, spread of voting results for you to be able to make a determination. But there's undoubtedly the fact of a lot of voter apathy. People have decided not to go to vote, and young people, not responding at all, despite attempts that have been made by political parties. But I think the biggest point for me to make is that political parties, in the main, have failed to devise and strategies and craft messages that land with the people of South Africa. And I think that's what we can read so far.
All right, okay. Ndumiso, young people, we're talking about them at the moment in particular, and they are the most active on social media. Some of us, we hear about TikTok. I don't even know how that works. Instagram again. But let's talk a little bit about the work you as a CSIR have done on social media and what it's telling us, because sometimes, sadly, there's this delusion that social media is the universe. And if it's trending on social media, that's what the whole of South Africa is interested in. Has there been, given what you've seen, a relationship in terms of social media and maybe voting patterns? Let's start with what the social media has been telling you in terms of mentions. What have you been able to read?
So, Peter, perhaps I should start by explaining how the social media aspect is done by the CSIR. So we get a sample of social media messages sent to us. We then, and the platform that we're looking at is specifically Twitter.
Right.
And so we analyze those messages. There's an algorithm that's built, written by the CSIR, that basically looks at mentions of party leader, of party. So those are the two criteria that we look at. And then within the mentions for this election, we are also looking at the sentiment. Is it a positive mention, or is it a negative mention, or is it a neutral mention? So we do not say this party did great, or go into those details. Again, as I've said before, a disclaimer, we do not do the political analysis. There are people who are infinitely qualified for that. My learned colleague here does that. So we just do the numbers again. And so what we have seen, Peter, is that there's been sort of a bit of a shift from the last election, 2019, to the current election. Looking at party mentions and party leader mentions, the EFF in the previous election was always number one in terms of party mention and party leader mention, followed again in a correlation of sorts by the ANC, party leader, party mention, and in third position it was the DA, party leader, party mention. What we have seen in this current election is that the EFF is still the most mentioned as a party. However, the party leader is no longer the most mentioned.
Really?
Interestingly, it is the ANC that has the party leader most mentioned.
So Cyril Ramaphosa got more mentions than Julius Malema in this election cycle.
Yes, according to the analysis done based on the Twitter platform and the sample received.
Okay, before we even get to the next step, this number of mentions doesn't differentiate between positive and negative mentions.
No, at this stage, it doesn't differentiate between positive
all right.
and negative.
So we need to proceed with caution on that basis.
That's correct.
All right. Then the next step, you then analyze.
It's the sentiment.
Yes.
Positive, negative, or neutral. Interestingly, most of the parties that we've looked at, the mentions are neutral. Roughly 50% of the mentions neutral, and then it's a split between, for the remaining 50%, between positive and negative mentions. So that's what we see.
What does a typical neutral statement look like? So that, when I start asking Makhosini to explain, what does a neutral statement look like typically?
It would be a statement that just simply mentions the party, does not have a negative word associated with it, or a positive word associated with it.
So it might just be something like the top two parties that I have to decide from, ANC, EFF, and it doesn't give a value.
Something of that nature.
Okay, okay.
And then, so this is built into the algorithm to scrape out and to, pull out those key words that are either negative or positive, and then classified according to the sentiment, the three categories of sentiment that we have.
The social media last time around, compared to the final result in the end, was there a correlation or not?
No,
not at all.
We didn't see much of a correlation. The ANC still got the largest number of votes nationally, and yet the EFF was the one that was the most mentioned in social media, both the party leader and the party itself, and yet they did not get the most votes. The ANC did, followed by the DA.
And I suppose what might explain that is the demographics, but that's not something you can tell on social media.
I suppose you cannot tell it on social media either. Suffice to say, we all generally just accept that younger people are more active on social media than older generations.
Makhosini, make sense of this.
Yes. As a political consultant, I've been involved with a number of campaigns, and we do the work that my colleague here from CSIR do. That sometimes has limitations because there's what I would call dog whistle messages. So it's not a message that's overtly negative. Sometimes the algorithms cannot pick up sarcasm. Sometimes people use sarcasm and you don't quite get it. But it is very useful in that it gives you a sense, even though it's not negative, positive, or neutral, just a mention. Because in politics, the worst thing that can happen to you is that people completely ignore you and they don't say anything about you. We've seen this with Donald Trump in the United States, for example. I mean, negative press all over the place, but he still won the election, at least the 2016 one. So you cannot read too much into, whether it's negative, positive, and all that, because there are so many things that underlying that makes it difficult. Sometimes people use, languages, they use tsotsital, all the things that the algorithms cannot pick up. But if there is more mention for President Cyril Ramaphosa, it means that he is the person who's uppermost in people's minds.
Okay.
And I think
either positively or negatively.
yes, I mean, and I think some data shows that with, for instance, the surveys that are being done that show that he is the most trusted or most admired politician. Not that he is supremely admired. It's just that he's above other politicians in terms of acceptability and all that. So I think in that sense, their study gives us a sense of where things are going.
I'm not sure, Dumiso, if you can even answer this one, but one of my biggest fears is I see social media, particularly Twitter, and you wake up one morning and randomly something is trending with no reason at all.
Can I comment on
Yes.
that? I wanted to make that point, actually, I forgot. You see, Twitter is manipulated, right? There's what we call an army, right? So you have an army of influencers that are paid to push a certain narrative or to push a certain hashtag. And when you go onto Twitter, you'll find that a topic is trending, and you'll think that it's because that particular topic is acceptable, but there are people who are paid to drive that. So sometimes it can be misleading.
Okay. We'll carry on unpacking this. Because I've just been fascinated by some of these things.
Yes.
And I honestly sometimes think that, the Bell Pottingers of this world may be still at work with some of the tweets that suddenly just, you wake up one morning and you say, my goodness, why is Peter Ndoro trending again? He's done nothing overnight. But there you are. We'll continue to show you the picture as it unfolds, particularly here at the Results Operations Center, where the results are starting to come in. A little bit earlier on, I spoke to one of the senior officials at the IEC, and a lot happens before the figures you see here on the screen. In the voting wards, in the voting areas, an audit process even takes place long before it gets here. So by the time we get the figures here, they really have been tested, they've been looked at, they've been audited. Party officials, party agents all agree, and they sort out the issues by and large, even before we start getting some of these results. So it could be that the counting happens, and it could be that a lot of the results are known on the ground there, but then they start now to do the admin, and then we start to get those results and start confirming them and start sharing them with you. So please stay with us. Also monitor the SABC News channel. But here in studio, I've got Makhosini Mgitywa, who's a political analyst, helping us unpack perhaps some of the reasons why we got to where we are today. So, Makhosini, I keep hearing that the political parties only have themselves to blame for the low turnout.
Yes.
And I wonder what in their campaigns did they get wrong? Was it their messaging? Was it the way that they campaigned? Were they hampered by COVID-19, or was that an excuse they might hang on to? Because clearly something went wrong.
Look, I think if we want to, very good question, Peter. I think if we want to unpack this and get deep into the problem, we must first look at where we started with this way of electing our leaders, the way political parties campaign. In 1994, during the first election campaign in South Africa, in the democratic dispensation, the president of the republic at the time, F.W. de Klerk, had a debate with the president of the ANC at the time, Nelson Mandela. It was a publicized debate where they disagreed on issues. Nelson Mandela was saying, this is how we're going to do things. F.W. de Klerk was saying, this is how we're going to. So there was that debate that took place, which got people interested. It was one of the most highly watched programs at the time. So there was appetite on the part of South Africans and the audiences to hear politicians and political parties fighting it out in the battle of ideas. So what happens in 1999 Now, out of the National Party emerges Martinus van Schalkwyk. Out of the Democratic Party emerges Tony Leon. And out of the ANC emerges Thabo Mbeki. And quite understandably, Thabo Mbeki felt he was not going to debate Martinus van Schalkwyk and Peter Leon. And the decision was that the ANC is going to even sometimes ignore the media and just go directly to people and talk to people. Now, unfortunately, there was a deterioration of that strategy in that, I think the height of what I would call madness was in 2016. You remember when there was this dabbing thing, no issues being put on the table, no debate whatsoever. You just send people in T-shirts, colored in your political party, go to communities and talk to communities. Now, if I don't know how many households they are able to reach with these door-to-door campaigns, but I know that a lot of people are left out of the loop. For instance, no one has ever come to my house. I don't know if anybody has come to your house. So there are many people that are not, touched or that are not reached by those strategies. So on one hand, all you see on television is this political party saying, this is what we're going to do. Another political party saying, this is what, but there is no real engagement of voters on the issues. So what people end up hearing now is, the president of the ANC sounding like a used car salesman, the leader of the DA, also trying to appeal to his own party's base, and the leader of the EFF. And in all of this, they are engaging only their supporters, their hardcore supporters, the people who would feel strongly enough to go to the street and wear a T-shirt.
So they're preaching to the converted.
They're preaching to the converted, exactly. They're not talking to the people who really need to hear the messages. I've been making an example here of how the way in which we are electing our leaders is disenfranchising us as voters. I made an example not so long ago, about a year ago. I was working at PRASA, the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa. Right? During the time when its infrastructure was damaged, its operations were severely impacted. I know that the Democratic Alliance was saying where they govern, they would like to take operations of Metro Rail and conduct them as the Metro, as it happens in New York, London and everywhere else. But I do not know what the position of the ANC is. I do know that the Gauteng government is also keen on the idea to take the Metro Rail operations here in Gauteng. I don't know what, the ANC in Eastern Cape, where Metro Rail has operations as well. I don't know what their attitude is. I don't know what the attitude of the ANC in KZN, where Metro Rail has operations in Durban and I think in Pietermaritzburg. So a lot of issues, I'm just mentioning one point, a lot of issues are left out, and political parties cherry pick what they want to talk about, what appeals to them. So if all that you are doing as a political party, all that you are saying, does not resonate with me, so I'm left out of the process, I'm more likely to be apathetic, and it's going to be very difficult to get me out of my house to go and vote. And I think that's what most of the political parties are experiencing. And another factor that I think, our political parties were very sluggish and they missed an opportunity. You have COVID-19, which comes with its regulations, social distancing. You can't have as many people, under one roof and all of that. And this was an opportunity for political parties to find ways in which they can reach people. South Africa, is not strictly a third world country. There is no square kilometer of this country that's not reached by Centec and the SABC.
Yeah, right.
On the other hand, the government, through a very good initiative, the Media Diversity and Development Agency, which is about making sure that each and every community have a community radio station or a community newspaper. But here we are having elections right in the middle of COVID. You have these radio stations that have got absolutely nothing to do. They are not part of the action. They are not engaged.
Okay.
Right? And all you see all that journalists must do must follow the president if he's going there.
But you must have a message, though, surely. I mean,
Yes.
the ANC sounded as if they were saying, give us one more chance, because unfortunately the record behind
Yes.
the previous chances has been one that's troubled them in terms
Yes.
of convincing voters. And so you can reach as many people as you can,
Yes.
but if that message is not compelling,
You know, as a professional spin
Yeah,
doctor,
yeah.
it's my job when I am serving a client or serving an employer to go out and put the messages of that employer. I know that you reach a point where, in terms of messaging, your publics or your stakeholders reach a point of saturation. You cannot, when it's raining all the time, I mean, it's pouring,
Yeah.
and you come and you make me to try to feel better about the fact that it's raining and I'm being rained on.
Yeah.
At some point, you must do something about it. If you're not doing something about it and you're talking, people get tired and they get apathetic. So what has been happening with the ANC is that President Ramaphosa has been president of the Republic since 2018. He's been president for more than 3 years. If you become a chief executive officer of a company, 3 years is a long time. There should be a turnaround that people can see. But the president was much more concerned about ANC unity. So on one hand, he's president of the Republic. On the other hand, he's president of the ANC. And for him to be president of the Republic, he must be president of the ANC. If he loses the position of president of the ANC, he loses the position of president of the Republic. Again, this is one of the things that we need to look at as South Africans, that do we want a president who is put forward by his party, or do we want a president that we elect ourselves who's accountable to us and not accountable so much to his political parties? Because the NEC, theoretically, whether they can do it or not, we don't know, but theoretically, they can recall him. They can say, okay, we did well in the elections under your guidance. We would want you to step aside. Theoretically, they can do that. And he has to worry about that. He has to consolidate himself in the ANC. And whilst consolidating himself in the ANC, he loses the trust and the support and the goodwill that South Africans had that he was going to change something.
Okay, so we're talking about the ANC, but they're not the only casualties.
Yes.
The EFF, their constituency, by and large, conventional wisdom would suggest that it's young people.
Yes,
But they're the ones that are most absent.
yes.
Does that mean their message didn't resonate, or what happened?
The message does not resonate. You know, the EFF, in my view, runs the risk of falling into the trap of being a party that is about one person, the leader. So it's like members of the party, sometimes they wouldn't know how to answer things. They don't know what to say until they hear what the leader has to say. And the leader, for whatever reason, sometimes he will say this today and tomorrow he says something completely different. He'll say, Judge Hlophe, is problematic. There's a rot where he is. And, a few months later, Judge Hlophe is the best thing ever to happen to the South African judiciary. Now, young people, there are some which are not so much, don't have that much education, but there are some who, are well educated and they can see for themselves. So maybe the style of, the EFF does not resonate with a broad spectrum of young people, but it resonates with a certain, a very limited, thread of young people. But it's not only for the EFF to reach young people. It's got its own ideologies that may not appeal to other people. It's for the ANC to have strategies to reach young people. It's for the Democratic Alliance to have strategies to reach young people. It's for, the EFF to have strategies to reach young people, the IFP, and so on and so on. So I think that South African politicians and South African political parties haven't begun to take seriously young people and their issues. They are the most disaffected. They are the ones who are unemployed. They are the ones who have to watch positions of leadership being taken by grey people like myself. They are the ones, who have student loans to settle. They are the ones who are really living a situation
Might
of
we
helplessness.
see youth movements sprouting then?
Again, where is the leadership for that? Because somebody has to provide leadership for that to happen. And my fear, Peter, is that we can have a situation where you can have a demagogue, a populist, a popular populist emerging from nowhere, galvanizing these disaffected people and these people who feel disenfranchised. And, we can have a situation where our democracy is in peril if we find ourselves in a situation like that. So for me, the biggest problem is that young people in particular, but South African population in general, is not fully engaged by political parties and the government.
The Democratic Alliance, they would say that they've tried to steady the ship because they've had a really challenging time in the last few years. Herman Mashaba, Mmusi Maimane, Patricia de Lille, and others. And notably people of color in leadership positions leaving their party,
Yes.
which sometimes then continues that stereotype that this is a white party with some black followers. Do you think that this has had an effect in this election, or are they just going to be where they were?
Look, this is what has happened with the DA. In 1994, the Democratic Party, then the predecessor to the Democratic Alliance, the Democratic Party was number 5. It was the ANC, the National Party, the IFP, Freedom Front,
Conservative
and then the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party came with a very robust message, fight back. And that message catapulted them from number 5 to number 2. They became the main opposition. And their growth was at the expense, in the main, was at the expense of the National Party and to some extent the Freedom Front Plus. And the Democratic Party then sort of, to many people, it was becoming more conservative when in its founding, it's a liberal party. But as it continues to grow, it reached a ceiling because, you see, I have a theory, and I'm very happy to share it with you, is that the electorate of South Africa is 60% ANC in the main, generally, 20% main opposition, and 20% other smaller parties. So there isn't much scope for the Democratic Alliance to grow. It has to grow at the expense of something. It can't grow at the expense of smaller parties that constitute the 20%. So it has to grow at the expense of the ANC and eat away some of the 60% of that voter base. So there is a limit to which you can do that. So they realize that having a face of a white person and trying to penetrate that voter base is going to be difficult. So in comes people like Lindiwe Mazibuko, in comes people like Mmusi Maimane and others, that their task was to go out and get black people to vote for the Democratic Alliance. Now, what was the turning point in that, in my view, was the election of Cyril Ramaphosa as the president of the ANC. Now, the boogeyman that was Jacob Zuma, at least the way they saw him, is no longer in the picture, and in comes a man with a very soft, image that appeals to a variety of race groups and cultural groups. Cyril Ramaphosa has a crossover appeal. So that stood in the way of the DA growing into the black constituencies, and to a certain extent also it stood in the way of the EFF growing. So the Democratic Alliance had to reboot itself and say, okay, we're not going to win with black people. Let's go back to our constituency, which were liberals and conservatives, because also they were beginning to shed some of the support to the Freedom Front Plus. So we don't know how they are going to do in this election because it's the first election under this new strategy.
Right.
But we do know that in terms of its performance as a political party, the Democratic Alliance peaked in 2014 and in 2016 under the leadership of Mmusi Maimane. Now Mmusi Maimane is no longer with them. Patricia Dillon no longer with them, Herman Mashaba no longer with them. And in fact, these people are campaigning in the main against the Democratic Alliance. So we'll have to wait and see how that has affected them. But I don't see them even reaching the level that they reached in 2016 and 2014.
All right, so now we talked about, we're trying to, the conversation really is at this stage trying to explain the low voter turnout, why people didn't show up. And I just wonder, we talked about social media earlier, we talked about mentions, and I just wonder if people are focused on parties and the party leaders as opposed to ward councillors and people who are actually going to represent them. And so that the ills of maybe the party in general and the leadership in general then affects somebody who might actually do a good job on the ground who happens to be a member of that party, but is not the same as the face of the party and the name of the party.
It goes back to poor engagement of constituencies. I'm telling you, I'm not joking when I say to you, where I stay, I've never had anybody come to me, other than the lamp posts that you see. Nothing has come to, not even on social media, that you know, there are algorithms, with Facebook and Twitter, where you can zoom in, on a constituency and flood messages there. You see nothing. You just see people individually posting. So the political parties need to have strategies, and I think most of the political parties need to appreciate that, political consultants and media consultants exist for a reason. And you have to use them so they can help you to reach your constituencies and get your messages to land with your constituencies. People of South Africa are rejecting this thing of these colorful campaigns that have no substance. You remember, I think in 2011 and 2016, people would buy fancy cars, brand them, and drive around with them, and that's how you are trying to galvanize people to vote. People have seen that you do that, and there's corruption, there's malfeasance. They can't hold you responsible and accountable for that. So they have become disillusioned with the system. So most of these political parties, in my view, they need to go back to the drawing board and figure out how they meaningfully engage the citizens.
Makhosini Mgitywa, it's been a pleasure talking to you. We're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much indeed. No doubt we'll chat as those numbers start to make a little bit more sense. But the number for today is 10 million, and that's just not good enough, I guess. But we'll discuss what they translate to.
Talking to you,
Thank you so much.
So,
thank you.